Hello everyone and welcome to this important and useful session on follicular imaging, and today we'll be discussing all about follicular imaging. It's a very common scan that is done by the radiologists, and because of so many new techniques and methods that have come up, it is very important for us to be updated. So beyond the size of the follicle and the ovarian volume, there are so many other things that we have to look for in case of follicular imaging. So we'll be discussing each one of the things one by one. So to start with the basics, we first need to understand the phases of menstrual cycle, which includes the follicular phase and the luteal phase, which is again subdivided into early follicular phase and late follicular phase and early luteal phase and late luteal phase. So in the early follicular phase, the follicular development starts, and in the late follicular phase, the dominant follicle forms, and at around 14th day of the menstrual cycle, their ovulation occurs, and then the luteal phase begins. So just prior to the ovulation at around 13th day, LH surge happens. So this is the basic, these are the basic phases of menstrual cycle. What is the need for follicular monitoring? So ovulation was initially monitored by conventional methods like basal body temperature, that is rise in the body temperature at the time of ovulation or around the time of ovulation, serum progesterone levels and urine LH levels, which indicated LH surge. But nowadays ultrasound is used for both natural as well as stimulated cycles. Follicle monitoring is done for main three purposes: to determine if the ovary is actually having any follicles which are ovulating or not. If they are not having follicles which are ovulating, they'll be treated with ovulation induction agents like clomiphene citrate. Secondly, for ovum pickup, so we have to determine at what time the follicle is actually going to ovulate, so that we can actually time our pickup of ovum. And HCG administration and dose optimization to prevent random HCG administration and risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So we'll see how it helps as we go further. So in the follicular monitoring, we not only see the ovaries but also the endometrial quality. Ovaries particularly to determine any premature rupture, any absent follicular growth or luteinized unruptured follicle, and endometrial quality to determine its receptivity. So what is the protocol in the scan that is used? So first a baseline scan on day 2 or 3 has to be done. Then pre-ovulatory scans, that is serial monitoring from day 8 onwards. And then the secretory scan, that is post-ovulatory scan. So these three scans are the basic protocol of follicular monitoring: baseline scan, pre-ovulatory scan, and secretory scan. So starting with the baseline scan, the three important things that are to be assessed on baseline scan is the functional length of the uterus, the ovarian reserve, and the ovarian response. So this is very important. Ovarian reserve as well as ovarian response have to be assessed on baseline scan. So ovarian reserve is the number of follicles that may develop, depends on the antral follicular count and the ovarian volume. So two important things that are included in ovarian reserve are antral follicular count and ovarian volume. While ovarian response is the capacity of the ovary to produce one or more mature follicles in response to stimulant drugs, which depends on the intra-ovarian flow. So there is the use of color Doppler here. So that is the intra-ovarian flow, that is a stromal flow. So ovarian reserve as well as the ovarian response are to be assessed on baseline scan along with the functional length of the uterus. What is the functional length of the uterus? From the beginning of the endometrium to the end of endometrium is the functional length of the uterus. So functional length of the uterus, ovarian reserve, and ovarian response are seen in baseline scan. So at the end of the baseline scan, the ovaries are labeled as one of the four: normal ovaries, polycystic ovaries, low reserve ovaries, or poorly responding ovaries. So normal ovaries are measuring around 3 to 6.6 cc in volume with FNPO, that is follicle number per ovary, that is the antral follicular count, of around 5 to 12 is normal. Here is the color Dopplers use, that is the stromal flow Ri of 0.6 to 0.7 and PSV of 5 to 10 centimeters per second is normal. So this is a parameter that we have to remember, that the stromal flow Ri and PSV have to be in normal range to label it as normal ovaries. Polycystic ovaries are large ovaries with a volume of more than 6.6 cc and multiple antral follicles with stromal abundance and increased vascularity. Low reserve ovaries are small ovaries with volumes less than 3 cc and FNPO, that is follicle number per ovary, less than 3. Poorly responding ovaries are decreased antral follicular count and intra-ovarian RI is increased more than 0.7 and PSV is less than 5 centimeters per second. This is very important. So here color Doppler is of utmost importance to label the ovaries into one of the categories. And all this thing can be easily done in a TVS more than a TAS. So coming to when the ovarian reserve is actually low, that is the antral follicular count is low, we can try ovarian stimulation, which if it improves the antral follicular count, we can go for an IVF with oocyte retrieval and finally fertilization and embryo transfer. But if the count doesn't improve, it is still low, then IVF cycle is actually cancelled and attempt to achieve better count in the following month is tried. But even if still the pregnancy is not achieved, then we have to go for overdonor. In case of inactive ovaries, that is very low AFCs, again there is a possible failure of ART with own oocytes, hence we have to go for overdonor. So coming to the uses of color Doppler, which I have been talking about since the beginning. So color Doppler is actually used to assess the maturity of the follicle and to assess the receptivity of the endometrium. So both the things color Doppler is very important to assess the maturity of the follicle and to assess the receptivity of endometrium. To determine when the follicle is about to rupture, that is ovulate, perifollicular vascularity is actually increased just before ovulation. So increased vascularity is determined by seeing the vessels about 3/4 of the follicle is actually covered with vessels. And the RI is actually reduced about in the range of 0.4 to 0.48 and the PSV is increased. Perifollicular PSV is actually increased more than 10 centimeters per second. And follicular RI and PSV are more important in decision making than the size of the follicle. This is very important statement. Color Doppler is of utmost importance to determine the time of ovulation. Then coming to ovarian stromal vascularity, that is also increased at the time of ovulation with more than 10 centimeters per second. And also there is something called uterine vascularity zones and uterine artery Doppler. We'll come to that in the next slides. So these are the grades of endometrium that are to be given on an ultrasound in the baseline scan as well as in the subsequent scans. So this is the endometrium which is homogeneously hyperechoic. This is an isoechoic endometrium. This is the triple line or trilaminar endometrium with hyperechoic, hypoechoic and hyperechoic lines. And this is the fourth grade, that is echogenic black region surrounding the midline echo. So these are the four grades. I'll tell the importance of these grades later. And there is another scoring system, that is zones, that I was talking about in my color Doppler slide. That is zone 1, 2 and 3 and 4. Zone 1 is when you put the color Doppler box in the uterus and we see vascularity in the myometrium surrounding the endometrium, that is labeled as zone 1 vascularity of endometrium. Zone 2 is hyperechoic endometrial edge is having that vascularity. Zone 3 is internal endometrial hypoechoic zone having the vascularity, and zone 4 is endometrial cavity as such showing vascularity. Zone 1, zone 2, zone 3 and zone 4. So as we go from zone 1 to zone 4, the vascularity towards the midline increases. So at the time of HCG injection or follicular rupture, it should be around zone 3 or 4 because we need increased receptivity of the endometrium for the to receive the ova. While in the baseline scan, it should be around 1 or 2. Otherwise, it will indicate inflammation and high chances of failure. Coming to uterine artery Doppler, it is to be done on the day of HCG injection, and pre-HCG uterine artery RI should be around 0.6 to 0.8, while pre-HCG uterine PI should be around 2.2 to 3.1. So these are the parameters that are to be remembered in case of uterine artery Doppler, and it has to be done on the day of HCG administration. So just prior to the ovulation, how does an ovarian follicle look? So pre-ovulatory changes, the follicle measures about 18 to 24 mm, the dominant follicle, and there is a sonolucent halo 24 hours prior to ovulation. Cumulus ophorus occurs, is seen 36 hours prior to. So this is a very important thing, that the cumulus ophorus, this is the cumulus ophorus, which is seen about 36 hours prior to the ovulation, and it's a very important indicator for ovulation. Then folding of the follicle lining 6 to 10 hours prior to ovulation, and perifollicular vascularity increased uh, just before ovulation. This is a sample report of a follicle monitoring. We have to mention the last menstrual period, menstrual history, and whether the cycle is actually natural cycle or stimulated cycle. Baseline scan should contain antral follicular count, ovarian volume, the diameter of the follicles, the stromal echogenicity and vascularity, which is indicated by RI and PI, and the endometrial thickness, vascularity, and type. This is the follicular monitoring beyond baseline scan, where we have to mention the date, the day of the cycle, then right ovary and left ovary dominant follicle, then endometrium, and then comment. So this is the 12th day of the cycle, for example, and in the right ovary, the dominant follicle is about 17 mm round. You have to mention the size and the shape, and whether there is how is the echogenicity within the follicle, whether it is anechoic or does it have some internal echoes, because luteinized unruptured follicle will have internal echoes within it, and it will be thick walled with cumulus ophorus, that is indicating that it is going to rupture soon, and whether the perifollicular vascularity is increased or not, that is also indicative of ovulation. In the left follicle, the dominant follicle measures 12 mm and it is round and anechoic. The endometrium, we have to mention the thickness of the endometrium and the grade, as I told you, this is trilaminar grade 3. This is also very important because grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 will actually help the clinician determine the receptivity of the endometrium along with the vascularity zone. So this is vascularity zone 3, that is the endometrium is well vascularized for to receive this particular OVA. And then on the comment section you can write the status of the ovulation, that is this is a pre-ovulatory status, because we can see the cumulus ophorus with increased perifollicular vascularity.